It's like there's the patient who goes to the doctor because he's got too much stress, and the doctor says, well, you got to stop drinking, you got to stop smoking, you got to get more exercise, you got to get more sleep, and the patient walks out saying, I got to get a new doctor. Because it just seems so overwhelming many times, all the things that we need to do to be appropriately dealing with stress or being resilient. So what I've done to avoid the sense of overwhelm is to create this notion of the path. So no matter where you're at, no matter how impaired you are, you can get on that path simply by beginning the process of engaging in the development of these 9 components of resilience. And that once you start doing something and you put yourself onto the path, there isn't anything more that you have to be doing. You're doing it, at least for that moment. Because I know personally a lot of the clients that I work with are always feeling like there's more they should be doing, and that even distracts them from doing what they need to do because, oh, well, what about this and what about that? Instead of just feeling satisfied and good that they are following certain steps in that process. Also, with the notion of the path, if you fall off the path because something takes you off of it, it's again a simple process of just looking to the first thing that you can do to put yourself back onto the path. So let's go through these 9 components and what they stand for and how they can be further developed. So relationship with self has to do with how you treat yourself. Are you accepting or judgmental, supportive or critical? Are you able to take in compliments, and do you own your successes and gifts? And much of this is based on the internal parent that's been created through your childhood experiences, through survival learning, and these primitive Gestalt patterns that I'm talking about. So to some extent, the internal parent or voice that we carry is the spokesperson of the lessons of our childhood. Now, one of the reasons why change is so difficult is that what feels right is associated with these lessons of childhood. So we can talk to our clients and they can get cognitively, intellectually, what's right and wrong, but when it comes to what feels right, it's still linked to their childhood experiences, and they rely on that over what they know intellectually. So I like to tell my clients that what feels right is actually the result of conditioning, and it's not in their DNA, because a lot of these people feel like it's something that can't be changed, and belief is a very important component here. Believing that we can grow away from what feels right, grow away from these primitive Gestalt patterns. And the goal here is the development of a healthy internal parent or internal voice. And I like to identify these qualities of a healthy internal parent that comes from a place of love, acceptance, compassion, support, valuing oneself, of I deserve, with appreciation and self-care. So some of the tools of this process is modeling a healthy internal voice, internal parent, identifying people in one's life who epitomize this model, and then finding a kernel of it within the client. It could be just the tiny part that got them into treatment. But it's finding that kernel that can begin to be supported. And one of the key tools that I use is a Gestalt dialogue process between their existing sort of powerful internal voice and then this healthy internal voice that you're wanting to develop, and actually having these two engage in dialogue. And then I coach the healthy voice that we're trying to grow and develop. I establish what I call the 11th commandment, which is it's never okay to put yourself down. That's sort of like a hard and fast rule. And to help them begin accepting their successes and the positive feedback that they get from others. And how many of you are familiar with John Gottman at the University of Washington? Okay, so he's done a lot of very interesting work with couples. He has a whole apartment with cameras in all the rooms, and couples come in and spend a few days there, and he analyzes their behavior. And one of his research findings is that healthy relationships have a ratio of about 20-to-1 positive to negative behavioral interactions. And that when that ratio drops to about 5-to-1 positive to negative, that relationship is in trouble. So I use this with my clients, and I actually have them begin to monitor their self-talk and begin to check on what their Gottman ratio is, where they begin to learn that it's in many cases around 5-to-1 or even 1-to-5, and to begin helping them set goals of making that more, or making that closer to the 20-to-1 ratio. Relationship with others, the ability to establish intimate and vulnerable relationships, which it means letting down one's guard, because this is the source of emotional nourishment. And this is an important component to resilience. The ability to set appropriate boundaries and to say no, so that you're not taking in toxic energy from others. An appropriate balance between sensitivity to yourself and sensitivity to others, the ability to get support, and the ability to discriminate between healthy and toxic relationships. So again, I encourage people to begin noting the ratio of positive to negative interactions with different people in their lives, and to begin limiting or eliminate contact with critical or negative people, which always gets a chuckle from people because sometimes a lot of our closest relationships are relationships in which there isn't a very good Gottman ratio. But even with the relationships that we can't let go of, it's still important to be able to do a better job of setting boundaries and saying no. To seek out positive, supportive people, to create opportunity for healthy attachment. And this is a process that can begin in the therapy or the counseling relationship itself, as well as to begin identifying safe people in a person's life and noticing how their connection is, to begin focusing on those few healthy relationships and how they feel safe in those relationships. To model and role play, including a focus on interpersonal touch. I will frequently hold hands with my clients to begin associating this notion of healthy contact. Attunement work is very important as well. We now know the importance with mirror neurons of how our emotional state is reflected in facial expression and how that gets recorded in the person that we are in relationship with. And so it's helpful simply to be, without even talking with a client, and to express positive regard. and simply holding that space and beginning to help them feel comfortable receiving that kind of attention, that kind of feedback, where that's the focus of the process. And trying not to carry around unfinished business, emotions that are not dealt with. I like to suggest the 4 agreements by Miguel Ruiz. His 4 agreements being impeccable with your word, don't take anything personal, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. The third component is relationship with something greater. And here is meaning, purpose, and direction in life, any spiritual aspect to your life, and giving service and enhancing personal value. Relationship with something greater is about connecting to the larger community, which helps to minimize daily hassles. If you have more of a purpose and a spiritual sense of life, then daily hassles are less impactful. Of course, the 12-step program and joining other communities are helpful in this regard, helping the clients develop supportive belief systems, and finding what they are passionate about. What do they care about that they can begin establishing some purpose in their lives? Identifying and setting long-term goals, again, to have a sense that there's more than just what's going on today, makes it easier to handle stresses and hassles, and finding opportunity to give service. So I had the next slide that you're not seeing. Shows one of the things that I use to facilitate this restoration of autonomic balance is neurofeedback and biofeedback. How many of you are familiar with biofeedback and neurofeedback? Okay. So it's a way of monitoring some aspect of your physiology, feeding that information back to you so you can actually learn control. And neurofeedback, or EEG biofeedback, we actually monitor brainwaves. So in that earlier slide, I showed you the different frequency ranges. And I pointed out that people with addictions have too much of the slow wave activity and could have too much of the fast brainwave activity at the same time. Well, what we do is we create a training protocol where we pull out those low frequency components, we pull out those high frequency, and then we also pull out the frequencies in the middle that we want to enhance. And we put them in 3 bar graphs on the screen in front of the trainee. And those bars are changing in real time, moment by moment. When the 3 bars go into the optimal state, meaning the very low and the very high drop below a certain threshold, and those ones we're wanting to train up goes above a certain threshold, a tone goes on, and they all turn green. So moment by moment, the trainee is learning every moment that their brain shifts into the optimal pattern, and the brain uses that information to self-adjust. So our brains are picking up information from our bodies, literally dozens of different physiological systems, as we are sitting here in this room, outside of our awareness. So with neurofeedback, we're simply giving the brain an additional set of information that it then uses, except that this information is about the functioning of the brain itself. And so we can literally learn to change our brainwave patterns based on this feedback of information. Besides that, our brains our brain gets into ruts just like our behavior. And so the neurofeedback literally helps the brain be more flexible. So on two different levels, we're training optimal health for the brain through this process of neurofeedback. I was going to show you another slide also. We just finished a study in which we worked with a group of breast cancer survivors who have what's called chemo brain, which is cognitive deficits due to the chemotherapy. And we did a neurofeedback intervention with that population and got significant improvement both in cognitive functioning as well as brain functioning. We did a neurofeedback intervention with an addict population. A while ago, I did this with Bill Scott, David Kaiser, and Siegfried Offmer. We published, in 2005, we published a controlled study we did where we went into a treatment center with a neurofeedback intervention, a two-part intervention. And we got significant improvement in abstinence rates. We had improvements in cognitive functioning. And most interestingly, we did pre-post MMPIs, and we found improvement in 5 of the 10 clinical scales of the MMPI following the neurofeedback protocol. Okay, so cognitive balance and mastery is positive expectancy versus catastrophic expectancy. Having a positive focus, the ability to engage the prefrontal cortex. So that's where executive function takes place. You want to improve our client's ability to engage the prefrontal cortex. The ability to let go of negative thoughts, and the ability to manipulate thoughts and perspective. Hello? So the tools to focus in and improve along this dimension of resilience is to help our clients frame their situations as challenges instead of problems. And another thing that I use is imagery to develop the prefrontal and executive functions by thinking about people having their own personal remote control. So everybody's familiar with remote controls. I got one right here. And I work with people to think about when they have difficulty with letting go of a thought, to consider either using the volume control of their remote control to turn down the volume of that thought, or literally to change channels. And a lot of these things that I suggest, I find helpful to actually do with the clients in the room with them. The other is to change perspective. So there are 2 different ways of helping them change perspective. One is to have them think of somebody in their lives who they look up to, who they think has their life in order, who's successful, and to imagine the situation that they're going through, that this successful person was going through, and to imagine what would go on in that person's head, what that other person would be thinking in that situation. And then the second one is when a client has made a mistake, has done something that they regret, and they're beating themselves up about it, and they're putting themselves down about it, So the other change of perspective would be to have them imagine someone that they love having made that same mistake. What would they say to that person? Because our clients are typically much harder on themselves than they are on others, and they're able to be more objective when it's happening to somebody else. So these two perspective shifting techniques are very helpful in helping a client get out of some of these cognitive ruts that they're in. So this is the study I was referring to with breast cancer patients, and you can see this is pre, these are brain maps, and this is pre and this is post. And what you can see here is these are the slow frequencies across the entire brain, and they're more than just about two, well actually right around 2 standard deviations beyond normal. And here is after the training. So you could see how a lot of the brain normalized following training using a neurofeedback intervention. So emotional balance and mastery is awareness of feelings, tolerating and being okay with feelings, not judging them, appropriate resolution of feelings, and being able to finish unfinished business. Now, here we have heart rate patterns, and here we see an optimal heart rate pattern. We call this coherence. And essentially what we see here is that as a person breathes in, their heart rate goes up. As they breathe out, their heart rate goes down. And if you breathe at 6 breaths per minute, you go into this optimal coherent pattern. Now, you can facilitate that by having an emotional state, a positive emotional state, such as appreciation and gratitude. That facilitates this optimal coherent pattern. But notice what happens with negative emotions, frustration. We lose that coherent pattern. So there's a direct link between emotions, emotional management, and our physiology, which contributes to whether you can establish higher levels of resilience. So in terms of tools for emotional balance and mastery, it's noticing and then accepting your feelings. They're not right or wrong. Reframing emerging feelings as an opportunity. So if a feeling comes up, it's something that needs to be resolved. And it's good that it comes up because it's giving you this opportunity to notice what the feeling is about, what unfinished business it's connected to, and then gives you the opportunity to go through a process of resolving the unfinished business. And here is a 6-step process for doing that. First is acknowledging the feelings, what it's related to, having a cognitive idea of what it's associated with. And as soon as you have that cognitive awareness and you relabel it and what it's related to, this is actually in and of itself facilitating neural integration, because the cognitive process helps to connect the left and right sides of the brain. And that integration is part of the healing process in and of itself. Allow yourself to feel whatever feelings come up. Find a way to express those feelings within the framework of acceptance. And acceptance is very, very important, because I have a lot of people that come into my office and they'll tell me, well, I've worked on my anger for years and years and years toward my mother or father or whoever. And the missing piece was acceptance. So they were angry, but they still wanted that person to be different. Or they're angry and they still wanted the past to be different. And so acceptance doesn't mean you like the way you've been treated. Acceptance doesn't mean you liked what happened in the past. Acceptance simply is an acknowledgement of reality. I can't change the past, and I can't change that other person. So I need to sit with an acceptance that this is the way they are or the past was. And that's what's required as part of the process of expressing so that you can let go of that unfinished business. And the last three components of resilience: presence, flexibility, and power. So presence is the ability to be in the moment in a neutral, aware, and available state, to be aware of your surroundings, to be engaged at the contact boundary. Now, when we have a history of rejection, a history of stress, a history of danger, the tendency is to move away from the contact boundary, more into your head, more away. And so we're less present. And so you want to be at that contact boundary for optimal functioning. Now, this is what we typically think of with presence as being aware and available. But in my model, I talk about two directions to presence. So one is being aware and receiving information. But the other side of presence is how we project ourselves out into the world. And this is very important because if I'm close to any of you and I monitored your brain waves, I'll be able to pick up my heart rate in your brainwave patterns. So our heart rate and the energy that we project from our bodies is received by people in proximity to us. And so you can see back where I showed you the different heart rate patterns, whether we're in a state of frustration or anger versus gratitude and appreciation, gets projected to the people that are around us. And so it's very important being tuned in to the kind of energy we project out, as well as what we're receiving. The 5 senses exercise is very simple. Like right now, notice what you're seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. When you do that, you bring yourself completely here into the present moment, since you can only be aware of your senses in the present moment. The portals exercise is using doorways, portals, as a reminder to be present, as a way of remembering yourself in the moment. So all of these different tools are important to help grow these components of resilience. I encourage my clients, when they're about to walk into a room, to notice their posture, to focus on a healthy breathing pattern, to smile, and to have their intention to connect with people that they walk into the room to meet. Stalking your pattern refers to, you think of a cat or an animal stalking its prey. Stalking your pattern is a process of noticing your primitive Gestalt patterns, noticing the way you typically deal with other people, with other situations, so that you begin to have the ability to do it differently. You can't do it differently if you're not noticing what you're doing in the first place. So stalking your pattern is very important in simply being aware of some of the old ways that you do things. In my sessions with clients, I will have them report what they see. I'll have them close their eyes, tell me what color shirt I'm wearing. Tell me what they remember from the room. Then I'll have them open their eyes and a few minutes later close it again. And do this periodically as a way of helping them be more tuned into their environment, be more present, and being more at the contact boundary. This projecting energy, I will have them stand in front of a mirror and think of different things and notice the difference in how they look when they're thinking of some things that are positive versus negative, when they're thinking of handling a situation well versus handling a situation poorly. And in general, begin to notice themselves and how they look as they go through these different kinds of emotional states. Flexibility and dealing with the loss of flexibility, loss of adaptability that got frozen in our childhood. It's the ability to learn and adapt based on new information, ability to adjust, to feel comfortable to changes in situations, finding the silver lining, the ability to shift goals for easier success, and the openness to learn and grow from experience and not restricted by rigid beliefs or perspectives. I always like to show this or related pictures to my clients and point out how a 30-minute experience that's impactful will begin growing new nerve cells. So just think about it, everybody here. Well, this weekend you've got all kinds of new nerve cells growing. So the tools for flexibility are exercises in which you imagine looking through somebody else's eyes, seeking out novelty and enriching experience. Attend meetings. I'll have my clients go to meetings of groups that have opposite beliefs that they have and ask them to find one thing in that meeting or that discussion that they can agree with, that makes sense. So I'm challenging them to be more open. I have them do routine behaviors differently, brush their teeth, their hair, and use eating utensils with the opposite hand. This is actually a very, very helpful technique on a lot of different levels. First of all, it really does challenge the brain. Secondly, it begins to have them get comfortable with discomfort and seek out and be open to feedback. And then finally, power, the ability to get things done. And notice the first component with relationship to yourself is the most inward, and here power is the most outward component of the model. And power is very important because earlier in my talk I mentioned demand versus capacity, and you want these to be in balance. The more you can handle more stress if you have greater capacity or greater self-efficacy. Okay? So we don't only have to address and limit or relate to stresses, the more we can develop our capacity to engage and be successful, the more we can better handle the stresses in our lives and the more resilient we are. So this is about focus, courage, which is the ability to take action and to, in particular, to move out of our comfort zone, to tolerate uncertainty, be persistent, assertive, decisive, to learn from mistakes and to appreciate the effort. And so to learn from mistakes is also about accepting mistakes and not having negative reactions every time you don't get it right, because learning always involves trial and error. I always like to review a client's history and help them own and take in their successes and their resourcefulness, and to actually reframe their history. So drug acquiring behavior might become goal-oriented behavior. So even though they've used some of their ingenuity for behaviors that have hurt them, it doesn't mean that that ingenuity wasn't something that can be quite positive if it gets redirected. So it's identifying skills and abilities. It's helping them be okay with mistakes, reframing mistakes. Affirmations or as-if statements to identify what they're wanting and to make statements that actually frame it that it's already happened. To recognize the importance of every day, so to start each day with some kind of goal, some steps that you want to take, so that at the end of the day you can refer to that day as a success. So just to summarize, becoming more resilient, enhancing neurogenesis is about developing a healthy, positive internal voice or parent, establishing and strengthening relationships with positive, supportive people while setting boundaries and limiting time with critical, negative people, reaffirming spiritual beliefs, explore and reaffirm purpose and giving service, practicing 10 or 15 minutes of relaxation on a daily basis. There's no shortcut with this. A regular check-in with the body, recognize, address, and resolve unfinished emotional business, training yourself to focus on positive thoughts and let go of negative, and taking time for appreciation and gratitude. I have an audio download if you want to contact me. It sort of goes through how to use my model. I will, if you send me an email, I have an upcoming article in Counselor magazine on this topic. There's my website. I've also established what I call the Mind-Body Room, which is a standalone station that incorporates my model with biofeedback, and it's automated. So, thank you all very much.